Hi, friends. Welcome to Showing Up. I'm Lynsey Dyer, and I don't think I'm live yet on Insta, so bear with me. Isn't it fun to do things live? Hi, friends. All right, we are live on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram. Thanks for showing up. I'm so excited. This is night one of our first Showing Up podcast in relation to the Showing Up workshops, where over the last 6 months, I've been asking myself how to really support this community in living up to our highest potential in times of challenge. I think it's been a tough 6 months for most of us. There's been changes in some capacity, and just having got a Kotler coming on now. I am about to bring him on at least on the Instas, but I'm going to take a minute here on this platform to talk about what an amazing human we're about to talk to. So Stephen Kotler is author of 9 best-selling books, 13 total. Has been nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Thanks for coming on Insta. And the executive director of the Flow Research Collective, which studies the neuroscience and biology behind ultimate human performance. He's used that to teach almost 250,000 people and organizations, from people like the U.S. Special Forces to Olympians to big time CEOs and executives at places like Morgan Stanley and Accenture and places like that. So excited to have you here tonight, and I'm going to bring him on right now. So thank you, Stephen. Thanks for making time for all of us that love skiing, that love winter, and I'm really excited to talk tonight about how we're going to learn how to apply flow, why flow is the greatest thing ever as skiers and athletes, and then push that into the workshop, which participants will get to really apply your work on Wednesday. So thank you. Thanks for being here. Where are you checking in from?
Northern Nevada, South Lake Tahoe.
Yeah, and you guys just got some good snow like us?
We did get some good snow. It's all white outside. The mountains are white finally. I can relax.
With you on that one.
Right?
It feels so
like,
good, right?
I get very calm.
I totally can relate to that. So I'm curious, you've been on every TV show and podcast, and I've heard you speak so much on flow, but I'm so curious how you came to this. Like, what made you dive into making flow and flow states like the main focus of your life's work? What's the backstory?
It's a 2-part backstory. Part 1. Sorry. Hi, everybody. This is Kiko. Kiko decided he wanted to be in the photo with a frame.
Kotler, like some of us, likes animals more than humans.
I do like animals more than most humans. It's true. So I started out as a journalist, and in the early 1990s, I was covering action sports. I covered a lot of science stuff, but I also covered action sports. And what started to happen in pretty much across, didn't matter what sport you were looking at, was the level of performance started going up and up and up. And simply put, more so-called impossible feats, never been done, never gonna be done feats were like, they were just getting ticked off one after another, after another, after another, after another. And, the journalists, we would talk about it. You know what I mean? Like, it would be the end of like 1995 or 6. And or in the early days when I helped start Freeze magazine, so we'd talk about it at the office, right? Like, there's no way people can keep jumping bigger cliffs this year, right? Nobody's going to throw anything more than like a 1260 or right? Like, everything was a limit. We've seen it, we've hit it, and then the next year, 10 more things would get done over and over. And this was, just mind-blowing in and of itself. Like, why was this happening? What was causing this? Was really, really curious. But more importantly, especially if you go back to the early 1990s, we don't think about it much now, but in the early 1990s, action sports were really seriously deep subculture, punk rock, rowdy. Most of the people I knew, I was splitting my time between Squaw Valley and San Francisco. So that was the world I was in. Most of the people I knew in Squaw and those communities, they didn't have a lot of education. They had no money. They came from, a lot of them, bad childhoods, really tough upbringings. And if you go into the high performance literature, bad childhoods, no education, no money. This is not like the makings of a group of people who you would expect to be routinely redefining the limits of human possibility. And that was exactly what was happening. You can't be a not professional athlete and chase professional athletes around mountains and across oceans for 10 years without consequences. I broke a ton of bones. As you know, like just a sheer more bones than anybody, except like maybe the professional motocross guys. Not because I'm cool, it's because I'm uncoordinated and determined. But the result was I was like, I gotta get out of action sports or I'm gonna die. It was very clear I was going to push it too far really soon if I kept trying to chase these athletes around. So I took this question, what does it take to do the impossible, pretty much into every domain imaginable. And I wrote essentially 13 books about what I discovered. So that's sort of part one of the origin story. The second half, because I didn't really know what I was looking at coming out of action sports. Around 30 years old, I got Lyme disease. I spent about 3 years in bed. I was very, 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 very ill. I couldn't walk. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I couldn't work. I couldn't write. I sort of went bankrupt. I sort of lost everything you could possibly lose in a long illness. And at the end of it, I was pretty near suicidal. The doctors didn't think I was ever going to get better. They would pull me off medicine because my stomach lining was bleeding out in reaction to they were done. There was nothing else anybody could do for me. I was bankrupt, and I just kind of figured I'm just going to be a burden to my friends and my family. Like, I can't work. I can't take care of myself.
Wow.
And so really suicidal. And a friend of mine, I'm living in Los Angeles at the time, and a friend of mine shows up at my doorstep and demands that we go surfing. And it was the most absurd frickin' request. I couldn't walk across a room. And it had been like 5 or 6 years. I mean, even I'd been sick for 3 years, but it had been a couple years before that since I had been surfing. I'd been in the mountains a lot. I'd been climbing a lot. I had not been surfing. So it'd been a long time. And I couldn't walk and I couldn't move and I couldn't think. And she would not leave my house. She was really, really, really determined to get me to go surfing. And after like 3 hours of it, I was like, anything to get her to shut up. You know what I mean? Like, I can kill myself tomorrow. We will go surfing today. It's fine. And what's the worst that could happen, right? So she drags me to Sunset Beach, which, if you know anything about surfing in Los Angeles, you know it's the wimpiest beginner wave in Los Angeles. She gives me a board the size of a Cadillac, and I'm so weak. She has to basically like lead me out with another friend by the elbows and sort of out. And the tide was so low that you could wade out to the break, basically, which I think the only way I got out there. And I was out there 30 seconds and a wave came, and I don't know, I lost my mind. I spun the board around and I paddled twice and I popped to my feet and I popped up into a profoundly deep, altered state of consciousness, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Time was going by at a crawl. I felt like I could see out of the back of my head. I was surfing really well, which was odd. And the most amazing part was, like, both mentally and physically, I felt great. Like, the pain was completely gone for the first time in forever. But most amazing was I could think. Like, I had full use of my brain back. And that wave was so delicious. I caught 4 more, and after that 5th wave, I was just disassembled. Like, they drove me home, they put me into bed. People had to bring me food for like the next 14 days because I couldn't move from my bed. I couldn't walk like the 50 feet to my kitchen. And on the 15th day, I had a neighbor who was an ex-pro surfer, and I saw the staircase with a surfboard, and I was like, "You're going to the beach, huh?" And he's like, "Uh-huh." And I'm like, "I'm coming with you. Hold on." And I went back to the beach, and I did it again. And the same powerful altered state of consciousness and the same sort of relief. And this is all I was doing. So for about eight months, the only thing I did differently with my life was surfing a couple times a week and have these crazy altered states of consciousness. And I went from like about functional 5 to 10% of the time to functional
We just
yeah, we Instagram died out. I see it. I may have to rejoin your Instagram.
Hold, please.
Hold,
Technical
please.
difficulties. What a surprise.
I have to say, though, you're frozen in a really good pose on Instagram. I mean, like, if you got to be frozen. All right.
I'm live again. I love that that I think everyone listening can relate to. It's usually in movement that we find these states. That's one reason why even listening, I find that I learn better moving. Even I've suggested to workshop participants to be listening to this stuff while moving, because I know I absorb it better. Have you studied that in your science?
It's an interesting question. I'm actually I'm going to have a question with a guy named Anil Seth, a neuroscientist named Anil Seth, this weekend about this very question. Okay, we're back. Good. All right. The question is movement and I don't. It's not. But for people who are physically oriented, it is. So for me, I'm more of a head on a stick than a body, even though I'm an athlete. I'm wired as a head on a stick. And so you have to come to me cognitively. I can't come in through the body the way you can. It seems to change over time with different people. There are periods of time where we come in through the body, and then other times we come in through the head. I think it shifts over time depending on who we are and who we're becoming and all that stuff. But it's actually the neuroscience underneath that question, which is the neuroscience of what's called embodied cognition, is really cutting edge. Like, that's the question. It's one of the questions a lot of people are sort of poking at, and it obviously pertains to flow a lot. So we're poking at it too. Though I think there are smarter people who are better equipped to poke at it than we are on this particular one, but we are poking at it.
Awesome. So you've talked about kind of what brought you here. And I mean,
let me finish that story, because we got Instagrammed out, and there was one sort of punchline, which was pretty quickly figured out that, these states I was experiencing, they got a name. They're called flow states. There's science that been done predominantly at this point by a cardiologist named Herbert Benson. He's at Harvard, who figured out that, hey, the neurochemicals in your brain that produce the flow experience boost the immune system and calm down the nervous system. Lyme disease and the nervous system gone haywire. So, like, by calming my nervous system down, any autoimmune condition is, by calming it down and sort of boosting the immune system, that was what was happening to my health. But I very quickly figured out, hey, wait a minute, same state that got me from subpar to normal, that was what was going on in action sports. That was going on every time I saw the impossible become possible. People were using these same states to go from normal up to Superman or Superwoman, right? And it was it was opposite sides of the same spectrum. So that's how I sort of got into this. And then the neuroscience followed, sort of, because I like to know how things work, and that's how things work. Yeah,
I just love that, so many of us athletes that have prioritized the conquering of the useless. This you have science now that's
let's time out on that, because it's not the conquering of the useless. So flow boosts a ton of shit, right? Like motivation, productivity, innovation, creativity, learning. On the physical side, fast twitch muscle reactions, strength, sense of pain goes down, etc. There's more stuff going on.
And it boosts the immune system, like you said.
It does boost the immune system. So there's health benefits, but the biggest benefits are to overall well-being, life satisfaction, meaning, and purpose. And we haven't conquered the useless as action sport athletes. This is the pause. So one of the clearest findings in psychology is that there are 3 levels of happiness that are available to all humans. Level 1 is happiness. How do you feel right here, right now? And it turns out there's not a lot you can do to change how happy or sad you are. Meaning, we're born, by age 9 or 10, we have these things called emotional set points. You get one for your sad level and you get one for your happy level. And all of your life takes place in between, right? And you never feel anything that's sadder than this sad point or happier than the sad point. You can sort of move them a little bit, but not really. We won't go into there. But the truth of the matter is, like, you can, as Dan Harris pointed out in his book on mindfulness, you can make yourself about 10% happier on a moment-to-moment basis.
With practice.
But with practice and with different stuff, some of which we'll talk about in the workshop version of this, portion of this. The next level up is known as engagement or enjoyment. And this is essentially a high flow lifestyle. So it is any lifestyle, like every single action sport athlete who has prioritized flow and in activities, surfing, skiing, rock climbing, snowboarding, mountain biking, bicycling, or creatives, musicians, photographers, art, right? Like, these are high flow. I always tell people, I'm like, I live in Lake Tahoe. Like, you can say what you want. There's a ton of people around me who you'll find in every action sport town. They work construction jobs in the summer so they can ski all winter and vice versa. And you can say what you want about judging the quality of their life and how much of a contribution they're making. But from a happiness and enjoyment perspective, they're doing better than most people. So
can you define what flow means to you? Because I think a lot of people.
Yeah, let me not define what it means to me. Let me define what it means scientifically. And there's 3 different levels that I'll talk about. Level 1, just colloquially, what do we mean by flow? We mean, scientists define flow as an optimal state of consciousness, one where we feel our best and we perform our best, right? So there's an emotional component, feeling my best, and performance component. What flow refers to more colloquially, as we're all familiar, it's any of those moments of rapt attention and total absorption. We get so focused on what you're doing, the skiing, the surfing, the rock climbing, etc., that everything else just disappears.
The writing, the
writing, and by the way, flow shows up everywhere. So, like, it could be the working on the assembly line. It could be the riding around with gang members in a motorcycle gang. I mean, like, when they did the original study on flow, flow is universal. It shows up in anyone, anywhere, provided certain initial conditions are met. They found it in Italian sheep herder, Navajo sheep herders, Italian grape barbers, Detroit assembly line workers, elderly Korean women who meditate, Japanese teenage motorcycle gang members, on and on.
It's accessible to everyone.
Yeah, it's accessible to everyone. In fact, the studies show that we spend about 5% of our work life in flow, often without even noticing it. And it's those, we get so sucked in and all aspects of performance go through the roof. That's the, like, loose definition. Psychologists have 6, they say a state of flow has 6 core characteristics, ways the state makes us feel. So there's complete concentration in the present moment. There's the merger of action and awareness. This is what's known as time dilation, right? This is time slowing down. Sometimes, in my experience, surfing, or really frequently, time speeds up and 5 hours go by in 5 minutes, right? You get in a really great conversation with your best friend. An hour goes by and you didn't even know. And you're like, what the hell, right? That's a low grade flow state.
But you're all high and excited.
Time dilation.
You can live off that for days. Yeah.
Sense of self disappears. A couple other things. So when psychologists measure flow, that's what they're measuring. Do these 6 things show up? And how much? How dialed up? 1 to 10, right? Where are you in the scale? And that's how psychologists do it. The work I do on the neurobiology of flow, so what's going on in the brain and the body when we're performing at our best, we define flow by a whole ton of stuff, both neurobiologically. So we see changes in neural electricity and neurochemistry, which is the 2 ways the brain communicates, right? It sends chemical signals or electrical signals. And we see changes in neural anatomy, where in the brain something is taking place, and network. Shit rarely happens in one place in the brain. It's usually a bunch of parts working together. That's a network. So all 4 of those things shift in flow, and we get physiological changes. Heart rate does certain things, and blah, blah, blah. And we're getting so good at figuring this stuff out. This isn't 100%. This isn't totally validated, but more and more it looks like your frown muscles are paralyzed in flow and your smile muscles are hyperactive. And by the way, frown muscles are paralyzed not because we can't be sad in flow. Frowning is actually an expression of work, when our body is doing work, burning energy. And in flow, it's that feeling of effortless effort, right? Like you're being driven by a force greater than yourself. We all, have that feeling. It's the end of the day. You're skiing or snowboarding in a flow state, and you're physically exhausted. It's run 20, you've gone hard, and yet it's effortless effort, right? On the chairlift, you're dying. You can't move. There's so much lactic acid in your legs. You want to cry, and then the next run happens, and you're gone again, and it's effortless effort.
So why do you think we evolved to experience this? What's the purpose evolutionarily?
As he drips water down his shirt, there's a reason my wife calls me the ninja klutz. So,
it's called being human.
Yeah.
Glad you're here.
I wrote about the evolutionary ideas around flow in a book called The Small Furry Prayer, which is about the relationship between humans and animals.
Love this book.
So I'll give you what we know, and I'll give you our cool theory after it, because you'll groove on the cool theory. Everybody's pretty convinced humans are the only species that evolved to run down their prey. We can run longer distances farther, right, than any other species. So we run our prey into exhaustion. So originally, two of the chemicals that show up in flow, anandamide and endorphins, are both painkillers. They do a bunch of other things, but they're painkillers. And just to give you an idea, endorphins are internal opiates, right? We have external opiates, morphine, OxyContin, heroin, et cetera, we have internal versions of the same drugs. That's why drugs like heroin work with us, because we create something similar, so that heroin, the external one, bonds to the same receptors as our natural opiates, right? So there are about 20 different endorphins in the brain, the most common of which is 100 times more potent than medical morphine. Just to give you, so when we talk about like the body's endogenous internal painkillers, these are really potent drugs. Better. Mostly our internal versions are often better than the external drugs that mimic these same things in terms of their ability to impact us. So the idea was, hey, you get a little more endorphins, you get a little more painkiller, you're going to run farther, you're going to get more dinner. More dinner means healthier, live longer, have more kids. That's an evolutionary pressure. So that alone, right? Then you start. So one of the things that's really important in flow is it heightens pattern recognition. So when we train work with the Navy SEALs or any Red Bull Air Force, any group of athletes, right, where they're relying on nonverbal communication, picking up each other's subtle tics and tendencies, right? If you talk to the Red Bull Air Force when they're flying in formation, they got to be able to tell whoever's on point, the person flying off their side literally watches their back of their foot. They have to be able to, that heel is going to twitch, and they got to know that means right, left, stop, dive, pull your reserve, shoot, bail. Like everything comes through that heel twitch. That's pattern recognition. The part of the brain is doing pattern recognition. That's how it goes from one to another. So that is massively heightened in flow. And so here's the second part of the story, which you will like. So humans co-evolved with wolves, as you probably know. We teamed up with wolves about 50,000 years ago, and it was a very, very, very big deal in human evolution. So what happened was wolves started coming close to our camps because they wanted our garbage, right? And we decided it was a good thing because less garbage meant cleaner camps, better health, better hygiene, right? And that's an evolutionary pressure. Also, wolves have better senses of smell and better hearing. So as they started hanging out around our camps, they became our alarm systems. They would bark at danger and all that stuff. This evolved. They then started babysitting our young, because the wolves are babysitters. They'll babysit we humans don't do this normally. Chimps won't do it, but we seem to have learned it from wolves. Anyways, after a little bit of time, we started pack hunting with wolves. And you have to remember, there's no hospitals, there's no medicine. You get a scratch and get gangrene, you're going to die. So you can't fuck up and you're like hunting buffalo, right? You're like 5 humans with spears and a bunch of wolves, and you're trying to take down a buffalo. I don't know. I run an animal sanctuary and a dog sanctuary, and not in our current iteration, but in our previous one, we had 50 dogs. I would take big packs of dogs into the backcountry. Dogs can get into flow. Same neural processes. When you're running with dogs, a pack of dogs, and you're not in flow, you trip all over each other. You can't figure out where anybody's going. They bash into each other. It's a mess. It's like a riot. When you snap into flow with your animals, because pattern recognition goes up, suddenly everybody drops into formations. The same thing the Navy SEALs use flow for, right? They coordinating group behavior. It sort of happens automatically once you get heightened pattern recognition. So the argument is it started out as painkiller, and then as we started cohabitating with wolves and co-evolving with wolves, what coordinated group behavior, and the people who are better at it, less injuries, more meat, right? More dinner, less injuries. That's big evolutionary pressure. So that's where we think flow comes from. There is some proof for this. There's more work is needed, but that's the story we've been telling ourselves, and it's a pretty good one, right?
Yeah. To back that up for anyone who hasn't read The Rise of Superman or Stealing Fire, or do we get to talk about the upcoming book in this talk?
We do, because your group on Wednesday is actually going to get the first insider preview of the book. Anybody's really got
The Art of Impossible.
The Art of Impossible. Yeah, it's so and it's worth talking about this because it's kind of neat. It turns out flow is remarkably easy to train, as you know, because we've worked on this stuff a little bit together. You can learn to get better at it. There are basic triggers. There's a process. It's a 4-stage cycle, and if you understand the process, this is all stuff we'll cover at the workshop. But basically, it's really trainable.
It starts with motivation, and that's the first thing that we're going to cover.
And it does start with motivation. Flow follows focus, and so anything that drives our focus more into the present moment will help us drive flow. And so when you're hyper motivated, right, when you're passionate, when you're purposeful, when you're fired up, that drives a lot of focus and can help drive flow. So we are going to start there. Next question.
Yeah. I think bringing up motivation and focus, I think these are things that a lot of us struggle with. And I've certainly struggled with those over the past 6 months since this whole shutdown. So let's jump into, those 4 stages and how to build more motivation, to build more focus, so that we can bring more flow into our lives. Yeah.
So with motivation, there's 4 kinds of motivation, right? There's 4 things you sort of have. There's extrinsic motivation. That's things that are external to yourself. So money. I need more money to survive. That's an external motivator. Or sex or fame. These are things we want in the world, and we're motivated to get them, right? There's also internal motivators, intrinsic motivators, curiosity, passion, purpose, autonomy, right? The freedom to choose our own path. Or mastery, the desire to get better at the things we do. These are the big 5 intrinsic motivators, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about. So the big deal about motivation, people want to make they want to turn passion and purpose into kind of like really mystical things, and that it's not useful. Meaning it's just not useful. What I mean by that is the reason humans are pretty simple tools in a weird way. Performance starts.
We are tools. It's official.
In a sense, it's official. We're tools. We are. We don't have a lot to work with. We have got our attention, where we put our attention. We've got our habits. These are like 2 of the big levers. And attention is sort of most of the ball game, because we experience the world wherever we put our attention. That's how we experience the world. Anything we're trying to do starts with attention. And attention, quick side note about the brain. The brain is only 2% of your body weight, right? It's really small. It's really light. But at rest, so forget we're not even doing anything at rest, it's 25% of your energy. Most of your energy goes to running your brain. So the brain always sort of wants to conserve energy, use less energy, that sort of thing. The reason that intrinsic motivation, curiosity, passion, purpose, they give you focus for free. When you're passionate about shit, you can't stop paying attention to the thing. We've all fallen in love, right? Passion, the neurochemicals between I'm passionate about what I do for a living, I'm passionate about skiing, and I'm passionate about this guy I just met or this woman I just met. They're the same thing. They're both norepinephrine and dopamine, these 2 neurochemicals. That's what creates all of these feelings. When we are passionate, think about how much attention when you're falling in love, you can't stop paying attention to the person, right? You can't stop thinking about them. You can't stop staring at them. That's focus for free. That's the big deal, right? When you get that kind of focus, when you don't have to struggle all day long to like, there's studies show that the average knowledge worker, so these are people who get paid to use their brains, right? The average knowledge worker focuses 11 minutes at a time before getting interrupted. Like we have, and this, by the way, this isn't the case when we're out doing action sports, right? Like go skiing, go DH mountain biking. Like you don't stop paying attention all day. You stop paying attention, you go to the hospital. Like you love it. You focus all day for free. So the reason that happens is because your intrinsic motivators are lined up. They're pointing in the same direction. Curiosity feeds into passion, which becomes purpose. And once you know what your purpose is, well, what do you need next? Oh, you need the freedom to pursue your purpose. You need autonomy. And what else do you need? The skills to pursue your purpose. My point is that all this stuff starts with motivation. There's a sequence to it. They have to be learned and stacked in a specific order, specific sequence. But once they're pointed in the same direction, a lot of fuel, a lot of energy, and as a result, a lot of flow.
And I love it. That's exactly what we're going to focus on in the workshop on Wednesday.
How to do that.
How to do that. What is our motivation? Is it intrinsic? How can we build our focus? How can we build and find our passion and our purpose and really get to the bottom of it? I'm so excited for that. I know we're going to work on something else called the Locus of Control and Habit of Ferocity. Can you dive into that?
So Locus of Control is just a starting point, but there's different research on this. But so Locus of Control is this fancy term. Control of what happens in your life, or does life happen to you? We all know people are like, oh shit, I can't, I have bad luck. That's somebody who has an external locus of control. Life happens to me. I don't have any control. Somebody who's like, oh yeah, the stock market just crashed and COVID happened and whatever, but I'm in charge of my life. I can get on top of it and I'll fix it, right? That's an internal locus of control. If you are interested in high performance, in peak performance, the research is pretty clear. You need an internal and intrinsic locus of control.
Is that something you can develop, or is that something?
Yeah, so you can develop it, but you have to go into sort of every situation and ask yourself, what do I control here? What can I control here? What can't I control? You can always control your emotions. You can always control how do you choose to feel about and react to a given situation, first of all. So you have control of that. And
do you really though? I mean, I know we're going to talk about this with Sarah too on week 4. But from what I've heard, you want to at least let yourself feel all the emotions because they're all attached to a chemical. And if you push those away, that chemical stays in your body versus getting pushed out.
You are right. And yes, here, hold on. So there's a difference scientifically, psychologically, when scientists and neuroscientists talk about feeling and emotion, they're different things. Emotion is the signal that comes up subconsciously. You may not even know you're processing it. Feelings are what happens once we attach a thought to it, basically. So in mindfulness practices, any of the respiration, forget meditation, respiration, any of those breath work practices, yoga, you're trying to put distance between emotion and feeling, right? We know this, that the signal comes up and it may be fear or whatever. And if you can get in there and look at it and go, really? Am I really afraid of that? No, it doesn't. The feeling, once the feeling shows up, yeah, you got to process it. Like it's got energy, it's got neurochemistry attached to it. You absolutely have to process it. You don't have, your emotions are what the feeling shows up as. That's your choice. You can notice the emotional signals. This is why in peak performance, you'll often hear people talk about, I hate this phrase because I think it's obnoxious. radical self-awareness.
Sure.
Which is a fancy way of saying, like, I'm paying attention to the feelings that are coming up inside, like,
or like taking a step back and almost being the watcher of the feeling.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. And one of the things, for example, I've learned as an action sport athlete, this may not, I think this is true for me. I will say one of the founding principles I believe of in peak performance is that peak performance is nothing more or less than getting our biology to work for us rather than against us, which is why what works for me is pretty much guaranteed not to work for you. Now, I have to say, whenever I say this in talks and in podcasts, the example I give is going to be moot in this particular conversation. I'm like, look, if what works for me works for you, I'd be standing up and I'd be teaching you how to ski through the trees at 40 miles an hour while listening to the Wu-Tang Clan. But in this particular audience,
it works for everybody.
That's what I'm saying. It works for everybody. It's worthless. But normally,
$7,000.
Right, exactly. Normally, that's a very good example. In this one, we're not so much.
For some people.
But yeah. So what the hell were we talking about that I went into that tangent?
You're trying to say that personality doesn't scale.
No. One step before that. What were we talking about that led me into the personality doesn't scale?
One step before that was making our biology work for us. And
one step before that. The quote, why did I go into that? It'll come back to me in half a second.
Well, just because you know that our biology is the same across the board.
Oh no, that I know. No, you asked me a personal question about something I did, and I was going to answer it, but I was also going to tell you that what works for me is probably not going to work for you. But I don't remember what the question was anymore.
Write this down: Wu-Tang Clan.
Wu-Tang Clan. Yes. By the way, somebody who's anybody on Instagram who remembers what the hell I said, you can just throw it into the chat bar and tell us.
It's part of being creative. Also,
sorry guys.
Well, what I love is what you're saying about making your biology work for you. And that's essentially what we've been getting at is you can have a feeling, but you can notice it without falling prey to, down the rabbit hole of, oh, now I feel sad and reacting as if from that place and then taking it from there.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think in my experience of working with this stuff, you get sort of like mastery comes slowly. For me, action sports taught me how to confront fear. So that's like for you go into the real world, that's a real issue. Right. But I'm good at, I can I can watch my fear and be like, oh, that's fear. Oh, this was the statement I was going to make, which is whenever I have noted, what I've learned is if I'm actually feeling fear in my body as I'm approaching like a jump in anything, like actual fear, I stop. It's a signal that I'm going to go to the hospital. If I'm going into something rowdy, I want to feel flowy and confident and light and loose. And that's the signal on the land. Sometimes you screw up, of course, or there's a bush in your landing, or who knows, right?
Do you get that same thing before going and speaking to big audiences? Or
I have been on stage since I was 11 years old in one way or another. So like somebody asked me this. I opened for Obama in Helsinki, and there were 25,000 people in the room, and there were another 50,000 people watching or whatever. And I was that I wasn't nervous about that, but my speech was 37 minutes, and they had it was supposed to be timed down to the left. And 10 seconds, maybe 30 seconds before I walked on stage, the host looked at me, and I said, he was looking at me, looked nervous. I was like, don't worry, man, I got this. I nailed it. It's 37 minutes to the dot like you wanted it. And he's like, oh shit, they didn't tell you? And I said, what do you mean? He's like, you have to do it in 32 minutes. That's all the time we have. You have to be off in 32 minutes. By the way, you're on in 10, 9, 8. So that was the last time I was nervous speaking, where like they literally asked me to cut 5 minutes out of my speech that was opening for Obama in front of 75,000 people. But like, honestly, that's what it takes to get me nervous public speaking at this point.
Yeah, clearly what you're made to do. Quite entertaining. Thank you.
I thought that was
And skiing taught you that, how to get
yeah.
over
I mean,
it.
I don't have any problem with that. Anger's been a harder one with me.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anger's when anger gets activated, like when it's hard to resist anger. Right? There's so much energy there. It's sort of delicious in a sense.
It's powerful.
Like it's really powerful. And I will also have to say, I mean, fear also, like money fear took a forever to get over. Right? I came up poor as a freelance writer, and you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I love
like
that.
where's my rent coming from? Where's like it was, I mean, it was laughable. Like, I mean, like laughable. The people, like my accountants would laugh at me. They'd be like, "What is wrong with you? Like, we do your books. You're fine. Like, why are you calling us and asking these questions? Like, chill. You must chill." Right? So, like for me, I always say there's nothing here I won't eventually learn the hard way.
Yeah.
I'm a really slow learner, but yeah, you can pull it apart.
I think you bring up a really good point about money fear. I think that's one thing so many of us can relate to, whether we should be afraid or not. So how did you overcome that? Or what would be your suggestion for anybody going through that?
So I'll give you my answer again. This is out. I do the neurobiology peak performance. I don't give money advice, but I will answer my question. I solved it two ways. One, I discovered, so you have to understand that I'm part of an industry, publishing, right, that went bankrupt twice, right? The bottom dropped out twice on the publishing industry in my lifetime. So 2001, when the dot-com crash happened, I took a 300% pay cut overnight. So did the entire industry. There were 56 writers on staff at GQ before the dot-com crash, which was the best place to work in America at the time.
You're already in the 1% of writers.
There were 4 left after the dot-com, right? They fired everybody, right? So so what I finally figured out was if you're going to be a creative of any kind, and I think this applies to anybody at this point in the modern world right now, multiple streams of income. Don't trust one thing as like multiple, right? Like multiple streams of income, not hard. It took me a really, like, from the moment I was like, oh wow, I can't trust publishing. I gotta be able to do 5 different things, and I gotta do it as well as I do this other thing, right? Like, it's hard to earn a living. So you don't get to, like, just because you're making a living in one thing doesn't mean you get to like make a living over here with any less energy. You gotta bring it, I think. But that was one. And the second one was I learned to think 2 years in advance. So I track finances, and it took me a very long time, but my life, everybody who works for me at the Flurries, like I've got a couple years worth of things taken care of, so one way or another. But I'm old, so it took a very long time to get there, but that was right. That was those 2 things. And so now I still get the same fears. The same fear doesn't go away. All that happens is it comes up and I go, okay, wait a minute. Now, what criteria are you scaring me? Because like usually what happens now is I go, oh, thank you so much for pointing that out. Like, that's a good thing to pay attention to. I appreciate that. And I got this, like multiple streams of income 2 years out. So like that, and then usually that diffuses it. Like fear, the thing about our emotions that people in the modern world, we don't like to talk about this a lot, but like emotions they're quick signals, right? They're meant to be, emotions are how we steer, but they're meant to be, they happen moment by moment. They're like, go here, go here, go here, go here. That's all they are. We attach all kinds of meaning and shit to them, and they get really thick and complicated and whatever. And in certain debilitating, you know what I mean? Like, and it's really funny. Like, you go to Hollywood, then these are communities like acting communities where they get paid to have emotions, right? Like, so everybody in LA, the emotions are really big. There's a lot of drama. There's a lot of theater. Not particularly healthy. You go to action sports communities, the exact opposite. You're like, oh wow, I got to do gnarly stuff all day, so I can't show anything. And you get that bro, everything's fine, man, attitude. You know what I mean? Like, and it's the same. And both of it is totally unhealthy. You pointed out that like you don't want to squelch it, right? Because that turns into anger and goes in bad places.
Well, then it gets stuffed and it turns into an injury in some other way, which I have learned. or stuck energy.
And and by the way, there's certain times I found when I had Lyme disease and I was so physically depressed for years, I had to get angry to get back to normal. It was so depressed. I was so depressed. Anger was the only thing. It was the only other emotion that was accessible to me, but there was more energy in anger. And once I could get angry, I sort of could work my way up from there a little bit. So
I think a lot of guys can relate to that. Like that anger is a power source. A lot of skiers, for example.
Okay, true story. Not probably the best way to get people into our training 2 days from now, but yeah, funny story nonetheless. I literally, when I was recovering from Lyme disease, I was physically healthy, I was cognitively healthy, but I could not bounce all the way back emotionally. Just my joy was gone, my ability to like feel life, except when I was surfing and in flow. And I discovered that I had to drive around in my car with blaring punk rock, smoking a joint with a surfboard on my roof like I was 17 years old again, and like get angry like I was when I was 17 years old. And that's what worked. I had to become 17 again. And someday I was like, oh yeah, okay, and now I can get back to like my other emotions. It was really the gateway. It was awesome. But I'm not advising people to do what I did.
Well, no, I think you bring up a really good point. And anger is this thing that we're sort of taught to, that's bad, or to stuff it away. And obviously it can be a really powerful tool. For some of the ski racing that I did my best, it was punk rock that like really brought me up. And now I've learned other like breathing techniques that can like
do the same thing.
What are the fancy words? Yeah, really activate those sorts of powerful tools. So what advice would you give to guys that are struggling?
I always say there's a difference between spite is a motivator, right? My wife, like, I love spite as a motivator, but I mean small s spite, not capital S spite. And there's a difference, right? My wife has a fortune cookie taped to our refrigerator that says, I get great pleasure out of proving other people wrong. And I do. Like, I will.
You're right.
Really, I literally like, that's a great joy, but it's not like, you got to make sure it's there, right? It's small s. You can't let it turn into capital S. It can't be a rage at a thing or a person, and you can't be trying to like bury the childhood trauma. You know what I mean? In that rate. And there are a lot of reasons. I'm not even talking about like there's some emotional health, doesn't feel very good. But as you get older, so we know this, this is work that came out of the Harvard Adult Development Project. If you have not, so you go through a big shift at around 50, late 40s to early 50s. And if you have not forgiven everybody who's sort of done you harm by then, if you can't put that anger down, right, you're essentially fucked for the next 30 years. Like you're almost locked out of peak performance and a happy old age. And those are some significant consequences, especially because our lives, like our lives are getting longer, right? Life, because of technology, and we gained, I think this current stat is for every day that we managed to stay alive, we gained 5 hours of life expectancy.
And that's only growing, right?
Yeah, and it's only growing.
Yeah, and for everyone watching, we're definitely going to live to 140, so you better get used to it.
By the way, there's some really, really cool bionic leg braces that are starting to come on the market that put energy back into the knee and things like that. So we're going to be skiing for a long time.
Let's talk about that on the workshop too. Yeah, if you haven't signed up for the workshop, we basically, thanks to Fisher Skis, we have 100 spots open. There's a few spots left, and then that price will go up. So check it out. ShowingUpWorkshops.com. We've got probably at least 15 more minutes here. I guess just to finish the anger thing, so what I hear you saying is like, yes, anger is powerful, but you got to forgive. And if you're carrying that stuff around, it's a real detriment. So if
it's great. I mean, it's a great fuel for like quick hits. It's a lousy sustainable fuel, and it's really hard to run on it. Like, first of all, it's really hard on your body. It's so much cortisol, right? Like the hormonal profile of anger is really hard on your body. You're going to end up, it's going to destroy your immune system, all that stuff.
I think everyone can feel that. So what are your suggestions for moving through that?
I think I mean, anger is a fast fuel. That's what it is. It's meant to be a fast fuel. So like, I just, maybe it's you know what I mean? Maybe you want to get angry at the top of the run and then put it down. I also I think it's certain sports, downhill mountain biking to me requires more anger, say, than skiing. I will listen to hip hop while skiing. I'll listen to punk and metal of DH riding, because that's that level of aggro and violence, right? It's sort of like so I think there are contexts, but again, like, it's not real anger, right? Like, I'll shout at the trail when I'm DH riding, like, you know what I mean? It's
one of my favorite coaches.
I used to surf with a guy who would scream at the ocean.
Right, because it's scary. Scream at the ocean. One of my favorite coaches, the best thing he ever said was, as scary as the mountain is, or you have to be scarier. And so that was exactly what I did.
That's kind of great.
Yeah, to level up to the amount of aggression it was going to take to be ahead of the slough train or the avalanche or whatever.
But there's a difference, as you know, between aggression and anger. And like, like, you can be incredibly aggressive, but you don't want to be angry, right? At first thing you'll ever learn, if you've ever studied martial art or fighting, is how to be super aggressive. Anger is terrible in a fight, right? It does terrible things to your brain. You'll get your ass kicked if you get angry in the ring.
It's definitely not being in flow.
Right. That's why Mike Tyson famously said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? Because getting punched in the face makes you angry. And all of that does really, because of the neurochemistry of anger, we'll go into it a little bit later on in what we talk about, but it limits the brain's choices. So you get less creative, right? And think about, like, if you're going into skiing, you're going to go ski a big line and you're not quite sure what the perfect way down is. If you're angry, if you're scared, you're going to have less options than if you're in other states of mind, meaning like less creativity, less innovation, less ability to get yourself out of a bad situation. So
let's talk about resiliency and grit. It's obviously been a challenging year. You kind of got into it last night in our pre-podcast. How can we build more resiliency, and how does it apply to the flow cycle?
The front end of the flow cycle is sort of the anti-flow state. It's a state known as struggle. It literally is a state where you are essentially loading and then overloading the brain with information. This is like skills acquisition. And it's where your sort of flow is what happens when you've learned how to keep your eye on the ball and swing the bat and step through the pitch. And flow is where you put them all together for the first time and hit a home run. Right.
But you've probably been practicing.
But you've been practicing all these individual skills.
Yeah.
Learning those skills sucks. It's the struggle phase. Right. And this can be cognitive, right? When I'm planning a book and I'm interviewing experts and I'm diagramming what should be the structure and what style should I write in and blah, blah, those kinds of questions. That's struggle too. And we can have it on a very short scale. Sometimes it's long, like I'm writing a book and it's going to take me a long time, or you're going to jump off a fat bastard and it took you a year to prepare, right?
Or getting ready to do this course that I've never done has been 6 months of struggle and trying to figure things out. And exactly. I'm very aware of the.
But you can also have tiny struggle phases. So this is not 100%, but work that our lab is doing is trying to show that at the front end of every flow state, you're going to actually trigger the fight response. So when I say you need aggression, because think about if flow follows focus, when you get that moment of aggression, and every action sport athlete knows this. For example, we've all been out riding a mountain bike. And when you go out on a mountain bike, the easiest way to go out to the hospital is go out and try to ride flowy, right? You'll go to the hospital, the trail you'll have bounces you all over the place. There's no way to ride flowy. You have to attack the trail. And when by attacking the trail, it becomes flowy, but you got to go through that.
Or is that also when you finally, you know, you hear it a lot, surrender, because you've been fighting, you've been either attacking or trying for so long, and then you finally are like.
So that's a more complicated answer. Yes, sometimes surrendering, like sometimes what you're doing is when you're attacking, you may have tilted. The flow takes place. So we talked about flow states having triggers. The most important of flow's triggers is what's known as the challenge skills balance. It says that we pay the most attention to the moment when the challenge of whatever it is we're doing is slightly greater than our skill set. You want to stretch, but not snap. So often when we're attacking, we're outside that challenge skills sweet spot. We're too much anxiety. We're going too hard. We're trying to, and what happens is, so we've all had this experience. I'll put it in ski terms. You go out and you're trying to ski something gnarly, and 2 or 3 laps through it, and you're getting your ass kicked, and you can't get into flow, and you can't get there, and you back it off, and you're like, fuck it, I'm going to just take a high-speed cruiser down a blue, and you start really carving, and suddenly you drop into flow, and then you go back and ski the gnarly thing that you were trying to ski, and you nail it. We've all had that experience. That's fairly common. What happens is we are outside the challenge skill sweet spot. We're pushing too hard. We drop back in, and that put us into flow. I always say, you don't want to take the big risk. You don't want to push that hard until you're already in the zone, right? When we work with, we do a lot of, most of the people who coach for me, either psychologists or neuroscientists. A guy, Chris Bertrand coaches for the Flow Research Collective, and he's the flow coach for the Canadian Olympic snowboard team. So Mark Morris is coach and blah, blah, blah. And he has taught the athletes how to get into flow before they get into the half pipe, before they get into the terrain park, because once you're in flow, you're already performing at your best. So you don't want to take a big do the dumb shit to try to drop yourself into flow. Get there first and then go do the hard, scary stuff. You go to the hospital a lot less, and you learn a lot faster, actually.
Yeah, it's amazing to be able to actually know where that space is and to train for it. And I'm hoping we can get there a little bit in the upcoming course.
Yeah, we'll get there.
So talk a little bit, get us into resiliency and grit.
Oh yeah.
I also want to get to have reciprocity.
Really quickly on grit. The most grit is a bunch of different skills, right? There's perseverance. There's the grit to control your thoughts. There's the grit to be your best when you're at your worst. There's a grit to train weaknesses. There's the grit to confront your fear. And there's the grit to recover. Recovery for peak performers, meaning, after your day is done, getting in a hot Epsom salt bath, hot sauna, restorative yoga practice, ice baths, foam rolling, etc. Active recovery requires grit. Right? Nobody wants to do that shit.
Especially of all of us high performers.
We really don't want to do it. We hate downtime. And right. But the research shows you have to if high access to flow demands an active recovery protocol and roughly 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's going to be a huge part of this course.
It's really important
recovery that none of us want to do, and we're making time for it.
So the point I was going to say is there are 6 different kinds of grit that it seems most peak performers train. They have to be trained differently, but I'm just going to talk about one thing, which is just general persistence, because this is, you talked about earlier as the body first, and I said no, some people are brain first, some people are body first. Except when it comes to training grit, it seems like you have to train the body first. So, for example, one of the easiest ways to train grit is do an extra set when you go to the gym. If you're doing 3 sets of 10, on your 3rd set, make it 12, right? And just you, and it's very when you're training persistence and grit, you have to do it very, very slowly, because you're not just, it's not about, you have more than enough energy to, like, there's a second wind, there's a third wind, there's a fourth wind. Like, you've already got the grit, and you've got it for physical tasks, and you've got it for cognitive tasks. You just, like, I can, it's a biological guarantee. I'm not going to go into why, but I'm just guaranteeing that to you. So when you train grit, it's not just about, oh, I'm training myself to be gritty. You're training yourself to believe that you're gritty. That's the equally important, right? You have to be aware of what you're doing, because that's what actually makes you gritty in the long run. It's not just doing the hard thing. It's the memory of, oh yeah, you know what? I did that hard thing. I did that hard thing. I did that hard thing. Right. And it's when those, and this,
I think that's the biggest thing is belief. And that's what we're really going to cover, because that's where all our power is, 100%.
And the habit of ferocity is, I think, what happens. So that's my term. I don't like to create a lot of terms. I'm very hesitant to do that. I don't like it at all.
Whatever, you're a writer. You love that.
I know. No, I just don't like to rename things. A lot of people like
redefine them. Understood.
Yeah, it's just a little too egotistical for me. But anyways, if you can get your motivation, all your intrinsic motivators lined up, if you can, there's goals also, and there's levels of goal setting, and then there's 6 levels of grit. So if you line all that shit up, you dial it in, and there's a way to train it in a sequence, and it's terrible, but not as terrible as it sounds, and very doable, right, by almost anyone. But the point is, I spent time around impossible slayers all the time. That's what I did for 30 years, right? I studied everybody, right? Like, those moments of time, the impossible became possible if it happened anywhere. If it happened in technology and science and art, I was often in the room saying, well, why is this happening? How do we figure this out? And there's a lot more going on, but the high level, whenever you see somebody who really is capable of taking on the impossible, you're really only seeing 3 things. First is the size of the original vision, right? And I always explain this to people. We all have the same 24 hours in the day. We all got the same shit to work with. We got the same biology, the same 24 hours in the day. Yes, we got born at different levels of the socioeconomic scale, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, same 24 hours, same energy, same physiology. And I always say, it takes, as my friend Peter Diamandis helped unlock the space frontier. He helped create the private space industry, right? Break the NASA monopoly on outer space and create $1 billion industry. And I always say, it takes the exact same amount of energy to unlock the space frontier as it does to become the best dry cleaner in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, right? If you want to be the best dry cleaner, you're going to put everything you got, all your time, all your energy, all your focus into that thing. Just like Peter Diamandis put all his time, all his energy, right? It's the same. So size of the original vision, the amount of flow in the equation is the second thing. The third thing is what I call the habit of ferocity. If you got all that motivation, goals, and grit lined up, you get what I habit of ferocity, which is the ability to automatically and instinctively lean into any challenge that arises. People who are really good at this, they lean in before they even notice they've leaned in. And here's the reason that's a really big deal. When most of us encounter a challenge, we get fearful, we get anxious, we dither, we waste time, we get less done. Maybe it's just 2 minutes. Do I call this person? Don't I call this person? That was a bad, blah, blah, blah. All that adds up. So how do you get to impossible? One thing you have to do is you have to go farther, faster, right, than a lot of other people. And one way you do this is by automatically rising to the challenge. And we've all had this experience, even if it's only as athletes, where you go through a day and you make a whole bunch of gnarly decisions. You just decide, it's one of those days, you're in flow and you just level up your game and you decide to do this and you decide to do this, and you're not even thinking about it. And then 2 o'clock in the morning, you wake up in bed and you're like, holy shit, I did what? Right? We've all had that experience. That's sort of the habit of ferocity. right? You automatically leaned into the challenge, and it's only after the fact you're like, oh my God, I did what? Now, you don't want to, like, you want to get very good at risk assessment and some other things, right? This is not, the habit of ferocity isn't useful if you're stupid about it, right? If you're making bad choices and you're leaning in, you need a lot of awareness alongside of this. I think a lot of kindness is probably useful here. Some other things, if you get my point, but that's the habit of ferocity.
I'm excited.
And we covered everything by 5:15.
The last thing I just want to leave with is, what are some techniques that you use personally to really bring this home to get yourself into flow? And of course, these aren't going to work for everyone, but just leave us with that. And anybody who's interested in the workshop, one more time, sign up on the ShowingUpWorkshops.com.
So one of the things really simple, we talked about the challenge skills balance. I do what everybody else does. My biology is no different, right? So I like the challenge skills balance. I write every day. That's my most important thing that I got to do. I write books. And so when I start a book, I can write my eyes closed 350 words a day, right? It's a little over a page and a quarter, basically. That's easy. 500 words, next 250 words, that's actually a lot harder, because to write that much, on average, you have to transition between ideas. 350 words is one concept. 500 words means you got to get that concept to the next one, and that's always the hardest shit to write. So when I start writing a book, I always want to write 500 words a day when I start, because it's just outside my challenge skills sweet spot. So I write up a daily to-do list, and it always says 500 words, right? And because what I'm doing, but that's the front of the book. By the middle of the book, it's like 750, 800 words. And by the end of the book, it's 1,000, 1,200 words or 1,500 words or whatever. My point is, it changes. But one of the most important things I do is everything I do all day long, I make sure it's in the challenge skills sweet spot. If I'm going to go to the gym, right, I'm always going to push slightly harder than I want to, right? Always going to make sure I'm sort of uncomfortable in that, like, oh, I don't want to do this. I want to do this. When I go skiing, when I go mountain, right, like, and I think action sport athletes get good at doing this instinctively in their sports, because it's how we progress. It's how we get better. And they don't often get as good at doing it in their relationships, in their work lives, in their in their other
recovery.
hobbies, in their recovery, all of it, right? Like, how do I, like, all of that stuff. And sort of, to me, that's sort of the art of life. One of parts of the art of life, right? Like, you gotta, like, if it matters, then this is like how you create the most flow. And it's also how you get the farthest, the fastest, whatever you're chasing.
All right, cool. So much more. I could keep you on for hours on how we really.
Yeah, that's a lot of blah, blah, blah from me. I think that's enough blah, blah, blah for one day.
I mean, just to reiterate, the flow, we all get excited about the flow moments, but it's really part of this cycle, and struggle is a big part of it. And what learning about this has done is helped me appreciate that struggle phase and know actually, like, not appreciate it as much as know that that's part of it, and push more during those times.
Yeah, no, you gotta, there's some common sense, but usually on this work, frustration is a sign you're going in the right direction.
Yeah. So getting more comfortable, being uncomfortable, and welcoming it. Thank you so much for making time tonight. I know you've been shooting for days and days and made time for us. So thanks. Can't wait to go skiing with you. Can't wait to talk more about how skiing is the best flow trigger there is. And we'll dive more into that in the workshop Wednesday at 5 o'clock for participants who have signed up for the course. And from here on out, we've got 6 weeks of really leveling up to our highest potential, and your work is a huge part of that. So thank you, Stephen, and I can't wait to shred this.
Thank you, Lynsey Dyer. You are,
Thanks
as usual, the best. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out with us. Appreciate that.
Cheers. Have
Bye.
a good night.